Gemini 27. A gypsy coming out of the forest. A gypsy is quite a strong image in our minds. Even though we don't have a lot of personal experience of the gypsy, we know of them because they're remarkable, noticeable. And the way in which they're noticeable can be summarized in the sense that they're closer to nature. They're a little bit wild, untamed. They're not members of mainstream society. They're living on the margins, and they do things more in keeping with hunter-gatherers than most of us. They forage for food a little bit. They don't respect property quite the same way that we do, and so on. So this unfettered way of life, this free-spirited aspect of an approach to life is what we're discussing. And we're saying, look, in this case, the gypsy is coming out of the forest. The gypsy is turning her back. I see this is a woman. Turning her back on her tribe, with whom she spent a very close connection. They're very tight in their family and tribe concepts. And she's moving away from that, turning her back on that security, that freedom, in order to move away from the forest towards the city. Why? The answer lies in the development of mind. Those of us that are studying this degree, we're moving away from an intuitive, unfettered wildness of being, and we're taking on some of the constraints of society in order to be more closely involved with civilization and what civilization has to offer. And this process costs us. We have to give up this freedom that the gypsy represents to take on the advantages of living in a city, for example. And these advantages include cultural exchanges with other people, conversations with a wider range of society. We can see the arts, the theatres and the museums, and we can see a greater depth and breadth of human experience expressed on this mental level. And this enables us to develop an attitude of mind, an ability of mind, a potentiality of mind that otherwise would not have been possible in the forest, as it were. And the sense we have here then is the movement of values from uncivilized towards civilized, and the love we have for the development of humanity's more elegant, more sophisticated, more considered, civilized way of being. And we're finding that to be a deeply impactful decision that we're moving to take. In other words, to move away from the love of nature itself towards the love of people and the outpourings of the product of people in their creative mode. That's a very big decision. It's a watershed event for the gypsy to leave the forest, leaving behind an old self and moving towards a new self, a new definition of who we are and what we're doing with our lives. It's a big deal, this. So this energy, it depends what planet is there. If you have the sun there, for example, you'd be looking towards becoming ever more and more sophisticated. And if it was the moon, you'd be doing that without really knowing that was what was happening, and you'd be the center of responsive, supportive, enclosing, supportive role in that process of civilizing a situation. Venus would draw you into having relationships, friendships, of the kind where you would actually learn to develop a greater sophistication in your way of thinking. Those would be the attractive relationships for you, and so on. Depending on what planet you've got in this particular degree, you'd interpret this differently. The general principle, though, is that you're moving away from wild towards civilized. That's the underlying principle. And the desire that fosters this decision is the desire to grow, to expand, to become more than you could otherwise. Now, this will not be without a cost, and there's a difficulty in that what was before cannot die off completely. So you're always going to be a little bit like a fish out of water when you're trying to engage with city life, because your essential nature is not that way. This is somebody who is basically a forest dweller moving into the city just to find it interesting and growthful, but not home. It's not quite comfortable. So it's a sense of going out and visiting, and then, well, then what? I mean, is there a part of you that actually still wants to relate to the gypsy self and to be wild? Because if that part spills out, bubbles out into your reactions and responses to other people, then you will always be seen as a marginal type. You know, cities do integrate gypsies. You know, there are gypsies in everyday situations, in normal houses with normal jobs. They exist, and we meet them sometimes. And maybe, you know, we treat them normally and embrace them in our world. But there's always something about them. There's a way of seeing life. There's an insistence on freedom that the gypsy has that cannot be taken away simply because they have an aspect of themselves that wishes to be civilized. And yet they're making this sacrifice because it's worth it. So you've got this kind of interesting paradox or tension, whereas on the one hand, you know it's worth it and you want to do it, and the fruits of civilization are there for us all to take. And yet the price we pay for that is to give up our wildness. And now we see this as a much more general wisdom, because each of us has to do this. We each have to surrender our natural inclinations in order to get along with others, to play nice. And that tension exists for all of us in most areas of our lives, that we have actually had to give up part of ourselves as a species in order to be where we are. A world governed by comforts and technology and ease of being is not a world where you notice the seasons change and where the weather actually makes a difference to your way of being. You know, we've kind of moved away from nature in order to have the sophistications and the comforts of life. So there's a poignancy about this degree, a certain sense of paradox that's never going to be fully resolved. And that lack of resolution motivates us, keeps us moving in the direction of further growth, the unfolding of further consciousness.